Hi, everybody. Welcome. I always feel bad standing right in front of the authors, but anyway, I'll get out of the way in a minute. Thank you very much for coming out tonight in the heat. I can't stop talking about the heat. I'm sorry. I can't stop myself. It's all I can think about. But we appreciate you coming out tonight. My name's Laurie Gilman. I'm the owner of City Bookshop. Many of you look familiar, and I think that this is one of my favorite kinds of events, which is amazing authors with amazing books from big publishing houses that also happen to be our neighbors. So it's kind of like a neighborhood party. So we love that. So, and if you didn't get your cupcakes and treats and wine, they're over on the other side of the info desk if you want to do that before we get started. And just a couple of housekeeping things. We have books for purchase upstairs at the cash registers. Everything is pre-signed, so we won't have a signing line as such, but if you would like to have a book personalized, you can just find Kathleen after the talk and she will do that. If you would like to have purchase one of Michelle's books and have that personalized, you can find her afterwards and she's happy to do that. Okay, I think that is all the housekeeping. And I always ask this question, so I'm going to do it this time too. How many of you have been here before? That's good. Okay, but not everybody. So that's kind of surprising. Well, thank you for coming back and thank you for being customers. We really appreciate it. Oh, and I also want to say thank you to our virtual audience as well. Thank you for being here. And we will be sure to include your questions when we do the Q&A after the discussion. All right. I want to introduce two people we're very happy to have with us tonight. Dr. Kathleen Smith is a licensed therapist and writes the popular email newsletter, The Anxious Overachiever. An associate faculty member of the Bowen Center for the Study of the Family, she teaches Bowen family systems theory to leaders around the world. She's the author of 2 previous books, and her writing has appeared in Slate, Psychology Today, and other publications. And she lives in Washington, D.C., right here on Capitol Hill with her family. Michelle Brafman comes to us all the way from Glen Echo, Maryland. So sometimes it feels that way, like you've made a cross-country trip just getting across town. And we're very happy to have Michelle back. We were just chatting that she was here for a book event not too long after we opened, which has been almost 8 years now. Very happy to have you here. Michelle has a passion for storytelling, and she's the author of several novels, the latest of which is Swimming for Ghosts, which you can purchase upstairs as well. She also has a passion for teaching others how to tell their stories and has taught creative writing at George Washington University, Johns Hopkins University, and numerous other classes and all kinds of setups around the DMV. Join me in welcoming Kathleen and Michelle. That's okay. Thank you.
I'm myself situated here. Thank you for that lovely introduction. Can everyone hear me? Okay. And again, double thanks to everyone for braving the elements tonight to come out and see us. I know, I can't believe it's 8 years since I've been here. I absolutely adore this bookstore. And if I lived down the hill, I'd be here every day. And I'm so thrilled to celebrate Kathleen's pub day. Very exciting. And it's not just the cupcakes. This is like a big day, big deal. So, just a little bit in way of introduction. I am an essayist and a novel writer. And I met Kathleen when I participated in the Bowen Center's professional lecture series that she curates, which is a great series. And this is how I discovered her first book, Everything Isn't Terrible, Conquer Your Insecurities, Interrupt Your Anxiety, and Finally Calm. And I insert the heck down. It's and a fangirl was born. I just absolutely love that book. My whole family has read it. Kathleen is like a person in our house because we just, well, what would Kathleen think about this? So my daughter is her first job and she's negotiating office dynamics. She's like, oh yeah, I don't know. I don't know what Kathleen would think about this. Like, well, don't gossip. Um, anyway, but both books I just adore, and they've informed the way I write and the way I parent and teach and wife and manage myself within every system I encounter. And I actually did what I had studied Bowen theory for a while. I worked with a coach for many years, but there's something about this book and the Substack that just keeps it fresh and relevant and kind of made me kind of understand a lot of the theories like in a deeper way. So I'm really grateful. I think of Kathleen as the Anne Lamott of Bowen theory because they both well, Anne Lamott is like an interpreter of, of other thoughts and theories, but they share this ability to make these big ideas relatable and relevant, and they both do it with a tremendous amount of humor and humility. If you, I mean, the anxious overachiever, if you got the edition today, it was so funny. It was about Kathleen and like I'm human and I'm freaking out because I couldn't get to this book, this book event tonight. But like then she just takes it to the next level, and we can all calm down with her. I love the conversational style of writing, and I love this title also because a therapist guide to stop pleasing others. And when I think of it twofold. I think it's like a therapist's guide because she has this expertise. She's Dr. Kathleen Smith, but it's also like a therapist's guide. It's for her too. So I really did you intend that?
It is a little confusing, isn't it?
No, I think it's great. I think it's great because I'm thinking, oh, but it's you too. It's like your own guide.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, is this on?
Yeah.
Okay. Cool.
I love that. Um, okay, so Kathleen effortlessly conveys the complexities and elegance of systems thinking, and to show how we can spot and in turn interrupt some old generational patterns. We're going to get into that in a second, which I find just incredibly hopeful and inspiring. And I know that Kathleen's last book has been highly recommended by therapists. A lot of therapists use it, Bowen and other, but it's also really accessible to people who don't know anything about Marie Bowen or family systems theory. It's calming. It moves us. You read it and it kind of moves. She guides us from like reptile brain to curious brain. And I just think it's a must read for people pleasers, for anyone who wants to be better understand who they are and how they function better within the context of a larger system, be it a family or a garage band or a workplace or you name it. Okay, that's my intro. I have so many questions, so I'm going to start asking them.
Can I add one thing before you start?
Of course.
I think it's so funny that people in your house are asking me what it would Kathleen say, because part of the home field advantage of tonight is having people who have actually seen me operate in the wild. I can reassure you that those people are probably not asking that question.
Well,
And I think that's part of the one of the ideas in the theory, right? Sort of the how we sometimes kind of don't see the reality of how people operate, and that's the beauty of having contact with each other, as we see that. So that's part of why it's so great tonight to have people who know me here,
to have their fangirls and then people who know your fangirl. Well, I think, but that's what is so great about the book, and what I was saying about that double meaning of the word therapist is because you know, you do tell these stories. I mean, the chapters are structured in such a way, they're just so accessible, the way you break up the information. But I don't think like we ever get the feeling that you're the authority expert. I really do feel like you convey the notion that you are like right there with us, figuring it out. So
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the I have the privilege of having the opportunity to work with folks who are really good at that. How um when there's the space as is it it's okay. When there's when you make the space for somebody to kind of be in charge of themselves, how useful that is for somebody. And I find that the more I can do that, and that's still something I'm really working on, as a therapist, but it's just so helpful to people. So uh I notice sort of in the writing that if I'm sort of inserting myself, I don't think it's really helpful for people, because most of the efforts that get described are in people's relationships outside of what happens in the room.
yeah, like there'll be a parenthetical here or there,
Yeah.
like a light touch, something funny. Not that I would know anything about that, but overall, I do feel like you give space to the idea and to the stories that you're telling, which is, I think, part of the power of the book. So tell me, why Bowen Theory? Why is this so compelling to you?
Yeah, so maybe some folks have heard this story before, but I was an anxious graduate student and I had to find an internship placement, as everybody does. And I heard about this mysterious place in DC called the Bowen Center. And I went over there and I said, I need an internship placement. I don't have one. And these folks tell me, well, we might let you come here, but you have to work on yourself and your family for a year and meet with somebody before we'll consider you. And I was just really fascinated by that, because most places were really anxious to get free help, right? In taking on interns. And my initial thought was, my family is fine. There's not a lot going on there. I'm not really interested in thinking about that. um as you do. And then I read this wonderful book called Extraordinary Relationships by Roberta Gilbert. That's, I think, an entry point for a lot of people into Bowen Theory. And it just, the board lit up. I could start to see the patterns and the challenges and the opportunities, and how I related to people and how they related to each other. And um and then you see the endless opportunities for seeing what you can do with it. And so that was a lot of fun to me. And I'm still working on it, so I'll let you know if I finish, but I don't think that's gonna happen. And so yeah, I think I don't think it's the way to describe human behavior, but I think it's a way, and it's a way that's been really useful for me. And I think it's a way that's not about a judgment or about blame. It's about sort of getting curious about your part uh, in the mix of things, and what you can do with yourself.
Can you, well, first of all, that's incredible. So you did this for a whole year before you interned?
Yes. Well, I
That's
yeah,
amazing.
and yeah. So
Oh. Okay. So can you, for someone who doesn't know anything about Bowen
yeah.
Theory, can you just tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, so I'll give the short version. Murray Bowen was a psychiatrist and a professor of psychiatry, actually, here at Georgetown in DC for a long time. And he was sort of one of the pioneers, of the fathers of family psychotherapy. And he actually led this very historic study at MINH, and which would not, you'd never be allowed to do this. But they actually brought in the families of people who had been diagnosed with schizophrenia onto the actual ward, and they lived there and they observed sort of the family interactions. And Bowen was really curious about sort of how some families fared better than others. How, he wasn't saying that the family caused the illness, but people's reactions to people's challenges had a huge impact on a person's functioning. And he really wanted to kind of move away from this sort of Freudian, humans are mystical creatures, and sort of get back to evolution in the natural world and see how, you know, we are social creatures. We're part of these systems, whether it's a family or another group, that are trying to survive and thrive. And how does kind of demystifying in the human in that way actually help us get curious, and B, sort of help us begin to kind of tinker around with our functioning, and then what a resource that is to the family or to the, you know, to the organization or to the community. And so he had this vision of sort of connecting some of these ideas about human behavior back to science, which I really love. I use a lot of examples in the book about animals and the natural world, and how that really takes the pressure off of me when I can, you know, I'm watching everything going on politically this week, and I actually wrote about this and I'm thinking about everything I read in Chimpanzee Politics, you know, by Franz de Waal, and like it's just helpful sometimes to pull those examples from the natural world. And Bowen Theory does that a lot.
Yeah, let's talk about grapes and carrots.
Yeah, so I talk about this in the book. One of my favorite examples to use with clients is this famous study. I don't know, maybe some of you have heard of it, where sort of the higher ranking chimpanzees were trained by the researchers to choose carrots for a snack rather than grapes, right? Grapes are much tastier to a chimpanzee, but they were trained to choose the carrot. And so the lower ranking chimps are sort of looking and watching them. And can you guess what snack they chose then when it was their turn, right? They chose the carrot. And we're not that much different as humans. You know, I think I try and remind myself of that. You know, we look and see what other people are doing, what's, you know, what's important, what's valuable, what's meaningful, what's responsible, what's successful, and we grab those carrots, right? And I think that's so automatic. That serves a purpose. Culture is a form of evolution, but when does it kind of get in the way? Because we are so quick to kind of look to the other to get to answers and solutions. And I think you see that with other primates as well, because we love to kind of rank each other and see what the higher ranking people are doing.
Well, that's something that I love, you know, you say that this whole, you know, looking at the natural world, looking at animals is threaded through the book so wonderfully. And, you know, a couple times you say, we're mammals. You know, we look around, you know, to understand our social order, and then you'll kind of go into an example, and it does really kind of, it does break it down in a way that's neutral. It kind of neutralizes a lot of like bad behavior, I think.
Yeah, I think seeing behavior as not good or bad, but adaptive, has been really helpful for me.
That's what I meant, adaptive behavior. Well, so let's talk about this whole idea of the pseudo and the solid self. Can you explain that a little bit in terms of how it relates to what you were saying about comparison?
Yeah, I think you know, in Bowen theory, there's this idea that so much of us and our functioning and our thinking is kind of borrowed from others, and that's not a good or a bad thing, but it's a useful thing to examine. You know, how much of your thinking changes based on who's in the room, and what do you want to do with that? You know, is that an opportunity to get clearer with yourself about what you believe, what you think is the best way forward in a situation? I always love to tell the story of when I got married. It dawned on me realizing that all these people from different eras of my life were all going to descend on the same place. You know, it was like the family friends from my evangelical childhood, my college roommates, like my colleagues, the people I met in internet fandom, right? And they were all going to be in the same place. And so I had no choice in that moment but to try and be myself, right? Because I could see sort of that audience shift and how it happened over time and how it does happen. You know, I go home, my accent changes, right? It's just so automatic in a lot of ways. It's just useful to pay attention to. And I think also thinking about what happens in a family or in a group when Bowen talked about this, when a majority of people are operating in pseudo self, it's not very steady. That's how a lot of people get radicalized. It doesn't mean that everything is a cult, but it's useful to think about sort of the difference it makes when one person or a couple people can sort of get clearer with themselves and take positions that are based on sort of their own reasoning, and those positions may change over time, if you get new information. And it doesn't mean that you don't take other people's experiences or into account, but I think it's useful to kind of work on that and to pay attention to how quickly we borrow, especially when the anxiety goes up, because it's pretty automatic.
Yeah. Well, you talked about it in this great podcast that you did, Am Writing, about how that pertains to like writing a book versus promoting a book. But I think it could be, you could apply that to a lot of different, any kind of creative venture. So, what does it take? And you talked about the difference between kind of comparing and being like this solid self. So how would you, like, what would it look like to be a solid self in that world where, everyone's trying to figure out how to sell their books?
Yeah, I mean, I know if I'm doing TikTok dances, then somebody like stage an intervention. I've lost the plot, because that is not a reflection of how I want to spend my time or like be responsible for this work. And for some people, great, maybe that's what they want to do or where they want to put their energy. But I think it's in any profession, in particular some of the more creative ones, to look to see what others are doing and just do that. In the book I tell the story about did any of you watch Supermarket Sweep? Any 90s cable children in here? So you guys know there's this game show where like they're pushing the carts through the studio grocery store and like furiously throwing like diapers and steaks and whatever the high cost items are into the cart, and they're trying to rack up as much as possible, right? And I feel like that's what I do and others do sometimes, right, if we're not paying attention. And that's back to that like pseudo self piece. So let me just gather a bunch of other people's definitions of what works or what's successful or what is even what's responsible, and I'll just do that, right? And that's an opportunity to like kind of mentally kind of put things back on the shelf and say we don't need that. That's not what you're about. That's not where you want to put your attention. And I think that that's helpful to do.
Yeah. It's really easy to get caught up in all that craziness. Well, you also talked about like one of the key elements of the Bowen theory, and something that, obviously being true to you, is this whole notion of differentiation of self. That seems like that's like really kind of the heart of the book. Tell us a little bit about that. It just seems like it's a natural, the solid, it's a natural departure point to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, it's not the sexiest phrase, right? Like even Bowen himself wasn't totally happy with the term, but that's sort of what he landed on, because it was kind of rooted in science, and this idea of how do you walk the line of being a person and being part of a system. How do you not so much do the right thing? I don't like the terms right and wrong, but begin to act outside of what is so automatic in the system, acting in a way that's not about calming things down, but putting one's own thinking into action. And where are the opportunities for that day to day? First you have to get clearer about what it is you even think or believe or what you're trying to do, right? And then you're in the game and you have to look for opportunities to do that. And so that's one reason why in Bowen theory, there's a lot of focus on what's called family of origin work, connecting with that, original system. And that looks different for different people. And I'm not saying that people can't work on it in other places. They certainly can. But looking for the opportunities and the people who bring out your own immaturity. And I don't know about people in the audience, but I think we all have a certain number of hours where we can experience our families before regressing into maybe our teenage selves or just not a great version of ourselves, right? And when somebody is able to kind of go into those relationships and pay attention to what happens, get less focused on blaming others and more interested in how you want to kind of manage yourself in that, how it's a different way of encountering people and relationships, I think. And I'm sure you can speak to that as well, Michelle.
I have
You
about
know,
5 minutes till I regress. I'm good for 5 minutes. Thanksgiving, like maybe an hors d'oeuvre.
you know, but I think there's something really cool about starting to wear that researcher hat and getting sort of emotionally kind of more neutral about people. It's not about excusing them or putting up with everything, but it is about sort of taking that systems perspective and saying, I wonder what would happen if I started to move in this other direction, or if I did this instead, and running the experiment.
Well, you also talked about that as, that willingness or that availability to kind of do something you normally wouldn't do as, a means to kind of rewire your brain, change your neural pathways. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think recognizing, that we have these positions in our own families and other places, that those are the sort of the cards that you're dealt. And how many times do you, if let's say you're like over functioning for your spouse and you sit on your hands while they load the dishwasher the wrong way, right? It's not like your brain goes, great, we know how to not do that, and how to not do that anymore. You're good, right? It takes a lot of time and a lot of practice. And I think people sometimes misunderstand that the anxiety goes away, right? But it's more about the functioning than it is about the feeling, because I think the feelings will always be there to some extent. But it is interesting to see sort of not just how the brain changes, but also how the system itself changes, and people can learn a new way of kind of relating to each other.
Well, you also talked about a big part of finding these new ways of relating is understanding the system, and that involves kind of looking at some of these multi-generational forces and layers and dynamics. Can you talk more about that?
Yeah, I think that's this effort of getting factual about the family. And that could be your workplace. It could be a religious congregation. It could be, the country. I mean, there are so many different things. But I did this with my dad's family. I made a list when I was doing some of this work at first. I made a list of every stressful event that had happened in the family for about 100 years. And you look at that and you go, we're doing pretty good, when you see what people were up against. And it makes a lot of sense that some people functioned the way they did, and having an appreciation for some of the stability that creates is just a different way of thinking about it.
How did you find all of that information?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. Not everybody has access to that kind of information about their families. I recognize that. But my parents had sat down with my grandmother when I was a teenager and interviewed her about her life. And I still have those interviews. They're fascinating to listen to because I notice my own reactivity when I listen to them, or what gets talked about and what doesn't get talked about. It's just fascinating to listen to. So you've got the facts, but then you've also got the emotional process and what's happening in the moment when people are talking to each other. So it's really cool to have that.
That's amazing. You also said something about, and I guess this comes back to neural pathways, is that we can, well, this is my language, but that's probably why I'm so excited about, like, we can transcend some of these forces by understanding, getting more factual about it, and really understanding kind of what we've inherited.
Yeah, I think it's just really interesting to see what happens when people get interested, and that doesn't mean that people are gonna cooperate or even change themselves. But something is different. I was talking to a woman the other day who was trying to overfunction less for her adult son. She'd worked really hard on it. It was something she was committed to doing. Did the son magically get more responsible? Yeah, in some ways he did, but he also got a girlfriend who was overfunctioning for him, because that's what we do. We're human, right? And so you can kind of laugh at a situation like that, right? And see that this work is really about, self. It's not about, I'm going to push this button and you're going to, he's going to start doing X, and that's why I'm doing it, right? If the motivation is still putting pressure on the other person, I don't think people get very far with that. So
What is it? My mom used to say you trade a garlic for an onion.
yeah.
Right. Um, so you said something, a couple of things, threads I want to pull here. You talked about reactivity, that you had a certain amount of reactivity. In the book, you describe the difference between being responsive and being reactive. Can you, what is that all about?
Yeah, I think it might be in the previous book. But it's all the same ideas. Yeah, I think just recognizing how much of the day are we on autopilot, you know. I don't know if somebody wants to toss out a percentage. I'm gonna say like I was gonna say 97. You guys are good. You're doing better than me. You know, but just that's the reality, and that's not something to feel good or bad about, you know, but how much we don't have the cognitive energy to be thoughtful in every interaction that we have with people. So you have to think about where you want to put your energy and attention. And you know, how much thinking does a person have to do to even kind of give themselves a heartbeat's worth of time to do something differently? You know, so I think that's just recognizing that it's these very small changes. That's why and I don't know if this is not selling my book well, but none of these stories are grand stories, right? They're small efforts, you know. It's somebody getting back in touch with their grandmother, you know, that they've been cut off from, or somebody introducing, you know, their boyfriend to their parents. Or I told a story, this one woman who was moving into a retirement community and she was really worried about what everybody was going to think of her and she and her husband, you know, and those are all opportunities. Obviously bigger, you know, harder, more traumatic things happen to people, but you know, there are these small opportunities every day for sort of doing that work on differentiation of self, and being able to say, you know what, I'm just going to say what I think, or I'm not going to write no worries in this email. Where, you know, or I am going to include this extra exclamation point and not worry about if people think I'm weird for being excited about this. You know, just those small things can be good.
Well, that leads me to a question about, you know, we're like literally a stone's throw from the Capitol, right? And one of my favorite chapters, and perhaps this is because, you know, what I've been thinking about lately is when you talk about how to be true to you in terms in a larger social and global context. And there was this whole idea of doing like these mini steps, but I just answered part of the question. So you go for it, because that chapter was so helpful and hopeful.
You mean the last chapter, or
The second to last one about when you're talking about, I don't know if it was the last one, the second last one. I could look at my book, but just talking about like how to, it was the one that I think focused on the pastor, the woman.
the woman at the yard sign one?
Not the yard sign, the woman who, okay, wait. Okay. Okay. It was the chapter when you talk about how to handle these political conversations, and how to differentiate, how to, in this very anxious system that we're living in right now, which I would call kind of our whole country. That's what it was.
Well, I don't presume to be an expert on this, but
You had great ideas. You had great ideas.
It has been helpful for me to go back to the family and to see how some of these patterns operate on a societal level. I love to use Twitter as an example too, because you'll see, on the internet, you'll see all of this. You know, what are people's efforts to change others? It's a lot of other focus, right? So it's either avoiding people, trying to tell them how to operate, or the conflict of things stay relatively calm, not super calm, if people are blaming each other, right? And so, you know, that happens in a family as well. And so I'm always curious about how people stay plugged into problems over the long haul and not get focused too much on what Bowen called this sort of symptom focused fixing that kind of calms the family temporarily, to have somebody to blame or somebody to focus on or something to fix or I'll be worried about, right? And that's not to say that those things can't be useful to think about, but how some people manage to, like I said, stay plugged into some of those longer, bigger problems, and be invested in things that, you know, the outcome which they won't see in their lifetime. And I haven't figured out how to do that, but I love meeting people who who are doing that, and how they are, how their position. I think more of it is taking a position on things than the pressure of changing others, and how that's useful for people, you know, when they're, you know, I have lots of colleagues, you know, at the Bowen Center. There's people from my church here tonight who are doing this kind of work, you know, people who are interested and curious, but not putting pressure on others to be a certain way, and what can happen when people are doing that. So
You also use expression, you have to sit down before you stand up.
yeah, we love standing up for our beliefs, you know, but you've got to have the sitting down part too, you know, the what do I actually think about this? Who do I need to talk to? Or, you know, that's the relationship piece of it as well. And the I think it's such an American thing to kind of be in love with the part of I stand up and let people know what I think, you know, and that's certainly a piece of it. But how do you stay curious about it in a way that's more than just this news cycle? You know, it's really hard to do.
Yeah, it's and also stay calm if you're dip into social media. There's a lot of screaming. Okay, so you go home and it's like some big family reunion, let's say in August, and everyone and your politics aren't necessarily aligned with everyone else's. Like, what do you do? This is my last question, I guess.
I think that the question I have for people, and not to turn the question back to you, Michelle, but that's what I want to do, is if you're not paying attention, what will you do? I think is the most helpful question to ask, and that's where you have some opportunities, right? Who are you not talking to? Who are you trying to manage? Who are you pretending to agree with when you really don't? Right. And is that an opportunity for saying, you know, I think about this differently, you know? That doesn't mean that you hang around for every conversation, you know, or put up with every person in every context, right? But when people start to see the opportunities of, you know what, I think I could do this a little bit differently, and I'm really interested in seeing what happens when I'm not putting my anxiety in that person's direction. You know, maybe they'll surprise me, maybe they won't. But if my reactivity is down, I think that's useful for the whole family, you know. But you know, if you don't want to start with politics, you can start somewhere, you know, start somewhere else.
It's just what you said. When one person is calmer, it can calm the whole system.
Not, I mean, sometimes people will get really mad at you and say, she thinks she's better than all, you know, they'll have all kinds of reactions. But I think people, you know, can I don't think you can have too much freedom or respect for other people. So
Um, okay, let's do some Q&A. Anybody on the
We do have an audience question. If you, the audience, anonymous attendee said, if you're already late in midlife and don't know who you are because of all these pseudo self layers, where or how do you start excavating? What are the first few steps?
if you're in mid to late life and you're already thickly ensconced in pseudo selfdom, how do you start excavating those layers and figure out who you really are?
yeah, I mean, I think this also is another American idea of what is your true, you know, self. And I recognize that the the title of the book plays off of that, you know, but then this idea that there's this sort of, you know, I think that, you know, obviously we're constantly changing in our beliefs and constantly change. But I think getting clear with yourself about sort of the cards you were dealt in life, you know, and your own position in your family, or in other places in life as well. How do you get curious about your automatic functioning? How do you get more objective about yourself? Often I think getting, you know, Bowen talked about this, getting more objective about your parents is a good starting point. You know, if you can't do that, you know, is there somebody else in the family? Is there another person who is important to you that helps you think about your own functioning. I think that's a really good place to start. And that's why in Bowen Theory, there's this encouragement about this sort of family of origin work that I think is a good starting point for people.
Can you just quickly define automatic response?
I think anxiety. So our real or our responses to real or imagined threats.
I'm really curious for your Substack about over and under functioning. Your Substack is excellent, by the way. So I highly recommend. And I wondered if you could talk a little bit more about over and under functioning.
Thank you. Yes, I one of the most. Yes, somebody asked about over and under functioning. It's one of the most popular things I think people talk about with Bowen Theory because it's very relatable. Yeah, so there was an observation about sort of how what sometimes in Bowen Theory is called borrowing and lending self. So a tendency for people to be over responsible for others or under responsible, right? And I want to preface this by saying we have this culture that's like very personality type focused. And so when I say over functioning, I'm not like, that's not like being an Enneagram 5 or an INTJ or whatever. It's describing a process, right? So there are many ways that I overfunction for people day to day, but there are also many ways that I underfunction in my own life. But Bowen sort of observed that there can be sort of a seesaw, or a more sort of fixed way of relating that will sometimes happen in a system, and it's useful to pay attention to. And it can work in either direction. You know, one person is over responsible and the other person kind of goes along with it, or the other person is kind of under functioning, and then the other person will kind of respond to that. And so I give lots of examples in the book. You can email me if you didn't get the pre-order workbook that goes along with it. I have a bingo board for you for overfunctioning because I love to make it fun, right? And so it's just useful to go through your day and ask yourself, when did I do things for other people that they could do for themselves? And that is not a good thing or a bad thing, but I think it's useful to ask yourself, was that about me helping them, or was that about me calming myself down or experiencing their anxiety, right? Because I will say this for my own work, I have found that when I am trying the hardest to be helpful to people, I am the least helpful. Because there's not a lot of room for themselves and their own thinking when I'm trying to kind of function for them. And so it's really helpful to think about maybe your own family where some of that pattern played out, and where do you notice yourself doing it? If you're a helper like me,
Helpy helper
how do
pants.
when is your help not helpful? And it's so useful, when a parent is thinking about that, or a leader, anybody.
And what you were saying is to calm yourself down. Then that's what the source of it is.
Yeah,
usually, right?
or the larger system.
The larger
yeah, it's
system.
about managing the anxiety. It's not about relating to people or being interested in their challenges.
I think there's a list of like 50 ways that you overfunction in the book. Did you have like this list of all the things? Okay, I got like a 48.
Excellent.
Woo, woo.
I only pull from personal experience. So that makes you feel better.
Okay, we're overfunctioning in the same way. That list was like sobering. Check it out. Yeah. Oh yes. What's the other question?
Any foundational thoughts or information to point me to about the dovetailing systems theory and religious faith?
Do you have any foundational information or thoughts about the dovetailing of systems theory and religious faith?
Yeah, well, I'd encourage people to go to the Bowen Center website. And also, I know a lot of people in seminary read Friedman, who is a contemporary of Bowen and kind of took some of the ideas and kind of made them his own. He's a rabbi who wrote Generation to Generation, which is a famous text lots of people read. But yeah, I mean, I think, religious communities are just another system where humans are gonna human. And so it's useful for people in them to to think about, again, that question of if you're not paying attention, what happens. And just like a family, you know, other organizations and communities have they have factual histories, and they also have emotional histories, and that's really useful to know about. And how does that maybe make current problems not seem so big or so unique?
Yeah, exactly. So unique. That diffuses the tension a little bit, don't you think? Like with the animals.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you have any other questions from the?
Yes, if you could pick the perfect location for someone to settle in and read the book, the perfect atmosphere, what would that be?
Okay, if Kathleen could pick the perfect location for someone to settle in and read the book, where would that be?
I would say not with your family while you're visiting them, because you're going to tell them that they need to read it, and that is the opposite of what I'm trying to communicate. Although I do appreciate the sales. So there's this dilemma of, I want you to tell your family, but I want you to keep your mouth shut too. So like, you know, I don't know which is better. So that's the only thing that comes to mind, is to maybe the next trip home is not where your brain is going to be, you know, in an optimal place.
Well, there is a little paradox here, because you do want to sell the book, but then you also don't want people buying other people's self-help books, or also losing self in pursuing self-help and gurus and that kind of thing. So how do you reconcile that?
I mean, it's hard. I can, you know, I'm still trying to figure out how to communicate ideas without trying to put pressure on people to respond in a certain way. And so this is an attempt to do that, and it's not necessarily the best marketing pitch. But I think people are interested in it. You know, I think people are interested in something that is maybe not a quick fix, or something that they have to give to their family. And I think there's a lot of interest in Bowen theory or in other types of, you know, systems theories these days, because I think it's evident that a lot of the symptom focus fixing, a lot of the worry about kids, other societal problems isn't, you know, isn't seeming to be working. So
I'll admit, Kathleen gave me this sweet card and a copy of the book. And I said, "Oh, I already have the copy and it's all marked up. Can I give it to my daughter?" Okay, I guess I failed on that. Do we need to? Oh, okay.
And this is, you can just touch on this, because this is my first introduction to Bowen theory, and fascinating. And similar to some other things that, or maybe that was another iteration that I have kind of been part of in my life. And does Bowen theory go into, I mean, I know it's not, you're not driven by a results thing. It's about looking at yourself, your place. But if you, say, decided to change the way you react within your family, and then that family kind of all cracks to pieces and falls apart and pushes you aside, asking for a friend. And, you know, then that continues the way it was, just with a little patch over, you know, your place in the family. Is that, I mean, how far into sort of the ramifications does Bowen theory go?
yeah, I think that gets back to my point about, oh yes, yes. So what if you are doing this important work and you get rejected, or your family doesn't want anything to do with you? I mean, that's a reality that a lot of people face, you know, that defining yourself and who you are and what you believe and what's important to you, it is not always met with this sort of you know, approval or even like tolerance, right? And so you know, I think that that's what people are up against. And I'm very interested though in you know, it's not just about the content, it's about the level of anxiety as well, you know, and how these efforts over time make a difference, and not just in the family but in people's relationships, you know, in their romantic relationships and their work, and their relationships with their children, right? But I think, you know, you raise a very good point. It's not about producing any particular magical outcome. It's about the value of stepping a little bit outside of what is very automatic to us, and kind of honoring that reality of like, yes, as humans, we're incredibly invested in what other people think about us, and there's a reason for that, right? We're mammals. We survive by getting other people invested in us, but there's this other piece as well, that we have, and what Bowen called our sort of individuality, right? And I don't mean individuality as like the kind of rugged individualism, that this sort of like a cultural thing in America. I'm talking about sort of the capacity to sort of know one's own thinking and to act in a way that's consistent with that thinking. But yeah, I mean, but there's no magic solution to get other people to operate any certain way. But I have seen how when a person is focused on managing themselves in relation to others versus managing others, how that does create more of an opportunity for people to begin to think differently. That doesn't mean that it always happens, but I think one person adding less anxiety into the system certainly makes a difference.
You have other questions coming in from the?
One more, there is.
Oh, yes.
I was there.
Yeah.
Last one.
I'm a huge fan, and particularly love the comments on overthinking. I recognize myself in a lot of it. So just to play devil's advocate, like sometimes that overfunctioning can be really gratifying in the moment, like if I'm
Yeah, I think
Should you repeat that?
oh yeah, so what's wrong with overfunctioning? It makes me feel good. And how bad could it get? I guess, is that Victoria, is that the okay. Yeah, I think I talk about this in the chapter on overfunctioning, and I talk about how it's a kind of pseudo maturity because we do get this kind of functional boost from either being helpful or being responsible for people in that way, right? And then you have to look at the system and ask yourself who eats the cost of that. Sometimes it's really obvious, and then other times it's not. I think about my own family. I had two grandparents on my maternal side who were very, very helpful. They were always helping an older member of the family, and that was wonderful in many ways, but it was also somewhere to put the anxiety too, I think. And I tracked over time sort of what happened as these candidates kind of died or sort of weren't there anymore. And I don't think the family fared that well in that sense by always needing someone to put the focus on, right? So then there's that question of how do I manage myself without having to involve someone else? Can I manage some of my anxiety without involving someone else? I think that's an interesting question. And then also, what happens when you start to give people opportunities to surprise you or to show you that they're capable in some ways, or maybe like the example I gave, they get a girlfriend who will do it for them, but then you're free to live your life, right? So, but yeah, I recognize that that we wouldn't participate in these patterns if they weren't tremendously useful in some ways, if we didn't get some kind of functional boost, if it didn't keep things kind of calm and steady to some degree. And Bowen can kind of theorize that these patterns were sort of okay as long as you didn't introduce too much of a challenge to the system. But then when you're up against a crisis or health problems or other things that humans face, right, all of a sudden those patterns don't really work as well and the wheels kind of fall off the wagon. So it works until it doesn't, I guess.
Okay, so I just wanted to say thank you so much. There's two things I wanted to say about the book that I didn't get to say. Okay, I guess I have the microphone so I can say it. Am I okay? Okay, the pop culture references, like we talked a lot about theory tonight. This book is so fun. I mean, because Kathleen just brings in some of these, like I was laughing out loud. She's so funny in terms of just being irreverent and this huge fund of pop culture knowledge. So she's got these little epigraphs with Ted Lasso and Fleabag. And so anyway, It's a super fun book, but it's also, I think, a very relevant book, a very important book. And I'm so glad I had the chance to dive in. And I really urge everyone to read it. And I do think you should buy copies for people, maybe not in your family, but you could just like leave them on people's doors.
And before we go, I would also encourage you guys to buy Michelle's latest book, Swimming with Ghosts. Michelle is awesome because she takes this to another level. She takes some of these ideas that we've talked about tonight and uses them in how she develops characters, which is really cool. So if you're looking for a page turning family novel this summer, this is the one you need to get. So
Thank you so much for having us. Thanks for coming.